Hi, welcome. This is episode one. We are going to be reading some short stories before we jump into something a little bit longer. So today's story is called Threads of the Weaver, and it's a short story that combines a little bit of fantasy with cosmic horror. So we'll see what you think. All right. Threads of the Weaver. The sand and baked earth stung even the bottom of Kazomo's ebony feet. The heat piercing the thick pads of skin formed from years of walking fire-soaked paths. That's how he knew it would be an especially hot day. Not that it mattered, for at all times but the winter months, with its cool flood rains, it was hot in the arid fields of the Denari Flats. Snaking his way through the adobe alleys, he paused at the intersection of the winding streets and the main thoroughfare. Waiting in the shadows, he watched as a small crowd passed, mostly merchants riding their bright beaks, giant flightless birds, to which simple carts, harnessed behind them, squealed over the mud brick roads. But it wasn't them or the everyday rabble for which Kasoma waited. It was for a group of men dressed in ceremonial whites, chased by boys holding shade leaves, that he waited. As foreseen, the priests came out of the yodel for the high noon salutation. Besides their fine silks, they looked quite similar to Kusomo. Muscular, bare-chested, hairless men who walked with pride and strength befitting the rulers of the known world. The only difference between Kusomo and them was the silver earring that dangled from their left ear, a single kernel of a green emerald, soul glass. Scowling, Kusomo spat into his palm and smeared it on the building next to him. If he wore that, he wouldn't be doing what he did now. No point in trotting walked ground, he thought. Emerging from the shadows to cross the thoroughfare once the priests were well and past him, he headed for the alley on the opposite side. He paused. He looked down the road that divided Zayomo, the city of woven grounds. The street was the color of the rising sun and led down to the green oasis on which the city's humble tribal roots began. The city rose from the desert like a mirage of ochre and flame. Zayomo's buildings felt both immeasurably old and part of the bleached landscape. Molded from sun-baked clay, ribbed with wood and inlaid with faded murals of long-forgotten saints made from colored stones. Rooftops sloped like resting beasts, domed and clustered close, huddling against the weight of time. On one side of the city sat all the great works and arts. On the other were the destitute and the unseen. But what drew the eye, what whispered of magic and madness, were the pinwheels. Thousands of them, spinning on the rooftops and temple spires, on the outstretched arms of statues whose faces had crumbled with the years. But mostly, they danced along the straight, weary road. They turned with the wind's breath, their bright painted blades a kaleidoscope of color amid the dun-toned world. One could not mistake the road and what side their blood belonged to. Taking a deep breath, Kazomo did the most foolish thing in his life. After calling on the bones, he crossed into the other side. Every ounce of him felt wrong. His instincts to turn back yelled at him, to go back to his side of the city. But his instincts to protect his daughter screamed even louder. Think of McKenna. The thought of her in bed, wrapped in cloth, as the leprosy devoured her flesh. Her fate was sealed, bound for a painful death. Kuzomo's face tightened, and he whispered, "That is why I must cut the thread." Touching the handle of the curved knife, sheathed in the folds of his pants, brought a measure of calm. Taking a deep breath, he moved according to the whispers of the bones, coming to the outer walls that protected the entrance to the deep loom. The wall was the color of the desert, and it stood thrice the height of a man and was adorned with the pikes and the sun-stripped skulls left to rot on their points. As foretold, the floods brought by the recent monsoon had broken a wedge in the wall, a portal just large enough for him to slip through. Kasomo nearly forgot himself, almost running straight for the secret entrance. But a flutter from the top of the wall rooted him behind the pile of debris in which he kneeled. a raven cried out, "Caw! Caw!" and the sound of men laughing rolled down from the walls. Kusomo watched as a bare-chested man, bald as he, appeared, swiping at the bird with their sickle-shaped cleavers. As was also foretold, the bird took flight, cawing and flying over the guards of the deep bloom, drawing them away, chased by bored men looking for something to entertain them in the sweltering heat. Kusomo wasted no time. Sprinting to the wall, he squeezed through, ignoring the way the jagged rocks tore at his back and spilt his blood. Coming out the other side, he gasped, finding himself in the sanctuary shade of several young acacia trees. Hidden by their bright leaves and tall shrubbery, his feet wiggled in the grass so soft it reminded him of his bride's embrace. The air was heavy with water, and danced with colorful sprites that only came when the lavenders and other aromatic flowers were in full bloom. The garden sloped downward at an easy slope, drawing the eyes to a sanctuary house made of gray stone. Kusomo's eyes popped. There was only one quarry where such stone could come from, and it lay many miles away. Pushing aside his curiosity, he checked the tops of the walls for watching eyes. Relief flooded him. The inner walls were built high, rising beyond the inside of the terraced walls. No man is allowed to look in on Oloaka, lest they be struck dead and 3 generations following them be cursed. But not me, Kusomo whispered. The bones have spoken, and always right on time. He'd almost forgotten about the green-skinned Nayoko, snake-born. The bones had also told him that so would appear the only creature allowed to serve the spider god. There should have been more, but it was a holy day, a day where most of them would be preparing for the Feast of Tongues in the Oba's palace. But even then, they wouldn't leave Oloaka completely undefended. But just one. How the prideful gaze, forgetting the thorn beneath the blossoms, Kusomo thought, chewing on the proverb. Reaching into his memory, he scraped out what he was to do. It was getting fuzzy. Even he, a bone caller, with access to the future, was still human and born with a limited memory. He just hoped that he managed to remember every part, for one misstep would see it all burn. Plucking a flower, he waited for the Nyoko to hold out its 3-fingered hands to a nearby sprite. The fairy's bright glow faded, and it buzzed away. Hanging its head, the snake-born settled into its coils. You hate the way you are born, Kusomo said, speaking the ancient tongue. Clicks and elongated vowels sounding like the ruptures and slow-moving rock slides of the cracked lands. The Nyoko jumped with a start as he appeared from the bushes. With the head of a viper, its face was hard to decipher. But as it drew near, a hand taller than the man, its body language revealed much. With the barreled chest of a man and the lower body of a serpent, Kusomo should have run screaming, but he trusted in the bones, for McKenna's sake. Fearless, Kusomo approached the Nyoko. An unholy union made you, and now even the beautiful things of the field rebuke you. A statement, not a question from Kusomo. I will tear your throat from your body and carve out your flesh and use it as a brood nest, human, the Nyoko hissed. Even so, there was an unmistakable quiver in its voice. By now, Kusomo was within its striking distance. Where are you? Kusomo pleaded, thinking to himself. The Nyoko's mouth unhinged. Its scaly body rippled, preparing to lunge, to kill, to leave his daughter suffering and fatherless. And then it came, just as the bones predicted. A pink buzz, wings singing like that of a bumblebee. Zzz. A sprite landed on the flower, and the Nyoko's body went rigid, turning from tightness to despair. Speak the words, Kusomo thought. But they had to be just as the bones foretold. Kusomo's mouth moved as he trusted in his memory. I'm here to unwind the threads of the weaver. Let me pass, and I shall untie your knots as well. He offered the flower, from which the little sprite sipped the nectar with a contented sing-song hum. At first, the Nyoko seemed as if it would refuse, but slowly the fingers took hold of it, rubbing for a heartbeat against Kazomo's skin. It reminded him of pumice stone. "I see nothing," the Nyoko said, tongue flicking. It turned its back, staring in awe at the happy sprite in the flower. "Amen, I say," Kazomo whispered. Hurrying around the snake man, he climbed the steps into the sanctuary house, crossing through an arcade of 4 pillars and into the fire-lit chamber within. Brass braziers hot with burning flames hung from the chains, illuminating every nook and cranny of the room, and despite this, it didn't seem enough to abate the shadows. The fumes of scorched sandalwood and myrrh rose from the fires and up to the dome ceiling. Dyes of every color shone heaven in its majesty, depicting the great maker and the elect, chosen to accompany him in his great plan. Around the edges of the mural, painted at equal intervals, shone the 8 stars, depicted in the majesty of a radiant sapphire blue. Below them, from tall plinths, stood the marble busts of the demigods, stewarding angels set to guard over the anchored realms. All but one remained intact. The rest lay as piles of rubble left to gather dust and tears. Kosomo refused to look at that image of Oluwaka, the only idol that was left intact. Once, the people worshipped all of the angels. Their names were carved into stone and sung in the smoke of incense. But now, most returned to dust, and the pinwheels spun in their place, catching the prayers of children and the curses of the old. Well, all except for the one whom Kosomo must slay. It may be a mystery as to why the other angels fell, but not for the weaver. Unsheathing his curved knife, he checked the kukri over, grunting in satisfaction at the sight of the demon mark still burning violent in the hilt. Marching forward, he approached the black pool at the center of the room. It was rimmed by the finest masonry money could have purchased, yet the waters were like the scum-covered edges of the slow-moving Kilmara. Kosomo did not hesitate. Stripping naked, he stepped into the water, holding only the curved blade of his kukri. It felt like ice. Another step, waist deep, chest high, spider legs skittering over the skin. Breathless, he'd never felt this cold before. But it was still warmer than death. Images of his daughter flashed through his mind. Then, dive, limbs flailing, a father willing to let go of everything for his child. Kosomo sank rather than swam, and yet somehow he managed to make it to the other side. The water was darker than the darkest of nights, and when he saw the blue light flickering like a flame, not flame, he thought he'd died. The searing in his chest brought him back. That must be it. Pushing, raging for the light, he reached it and everything shifted. Time itself felt as if it had become compressed and he had been thrown against and through a gate unseen. Then, he was breaking the surface of the black waters. Scrabbling for something to heave himself free, he found purchase on the lip of the pool. Crawling from it, he lay on his back, sucking on air. And as his wits and breath returned, he realized the gravity of what had occurred. Eyes adjusting, he saw that he was in a shadow-twined mirror image of the sanctuary chamber, except that this was a cave made of dark stone and pockmarked by thousands of glowing stones. Is this what it's like to stand within heavens? Brow knit, Kosomo frowned as he looked to the pool. Its surface lay smooth as glass. Had he even come through it? Were it not for the beads of dripping water running down his chest and thighs, he would have thought otherwise. Mother of stones, he whispered, studying the lights reflected in the waters. He saw spiderweb veins that pulsated with a life of their own. And then looking up, he saw the web, the weave. Kosomo had arrived. A grotesque voice, smooth, but echoing as if whispered from the several different mouths, slithered its way through the chamber. It's been some time since a human last came to the underloom, underloom, underloom. Kusomo shivered at the way it echoed off the walls and the ceiling, but his resolve remained unfettered. I have come to cut the line of misery you have spun around my daughter. Show me her thread, Olowoko. And should I not? Then your corpse will be left to rot by sundown. The weaver erupted with laughter. It sounded like the screams of the damned. The sounds of feet skittering over stone neared Kusomo and then passed. His head craned, eyes turned, but he could only catch fleeting glances of the weaver before the thread of its web hid it away. Even a brief sight took the air from Kusomo's lungs. Don't be afraid, Kusomo thought, for I have a... Filth! Olowoko shrilled. How dare you carry that? Empowered by the slight shake in the weaver's voice, Kusomo lifted the kukri high, as if the mere sight of it would ward the god away. In the light of the god's infinite web, the curved knife shone true, the sharpened end of a mandible taken from the husk of a demon, and warded with sigils from the far east. Oh, the toils Kusomo had paid for it. A weapon for only one purpose. The weaver's bloated shape descended with the promise of death in its voice, and a sickly sweet scent as its stinger curled out from its abdomen. Here came the moment that Kusomo had not forgotten. The bones had warned him, and so he heeded. Kusomo waited, 2 breaths, and then moved to the side. Olowoka's stinger punctured the stonework where he had stood. Rock stung Kusomo's skin. Green spray stung, acid devouring his skin. Only a little, just enough to make him scream. Kusomo took hold of the god's flesh. He stood too close to make out its figure, but it was composed of chitinous scales, moist gelatinous flesh just beneath. Several human mouths stretched over its body, screaming at him, toothless and as new as babes. Gritting his teeth, Kusomo dug his hands in, gripping a gap in the black-veined shell. His fingers gouged deep into the god's flesh, or rather, its body parted and permitted his fingers entrance. He shivered, gasping as the heavens and cosmic reality opened up before him. Air rushed around Kusomo as the weaver lifted them both into the web. Kusomo's body pressed into the side of Olowoko's. The mouths moaned, their pale, sallow tongues licking him, tasting him. But Kusomo couldn't protest. His body was there, but his mind was whisked to the beginning, with the true God, at the first instance, the second instance, the third, the fall, the lights that marked the beginning of creation. Worlds, realities, so many. Curse my salt, Kusomo gasped, barely registering the beauty of the web around him, of the way the weaver's shell pinched his fingers, pinchers that almost sawed through the last bits of bone. But it didn't matter. Kusomo stood at the foot of glory. That was until the darkness. In the blink of an eye, the master was gone, and evil was left to run rampant throughout creation. But it had left glimmers of hope behind. Some called them anchors, some called them ankoriels. Kusomo called them the amjurao, the gift that flows. But it wasn't enough, and even the most loyal of hosts had come to resent him. By now, they were at the heart of the web, not one that Olowoko had made, but one that he'd been charged with keeping untangled and groomed so that reality would stay straight. It was beautiful. The lines were the light of stars spun into silver and shimmer, millions of them interconnected and crossed. It was amazing that the weaver could keep track of so many soul lines. Hues of velvet sable and purple and even pinks, greens hung in the star-studded dark. Were they even in the cave or the heavens? And then Kusomo saw it, a line of light as faded as the waxing moon before sunrise. His McKenna's line. Perhaps it was the knowledge given by the bones, or the brief connection from the touch with the god that illuminated the man's mind, but he knew it was her sickness that had fated it so. Around it spiraled a thread so dark that only the contrast of McKenna's soul light rendered it to the naked eye. It was the sickness to be cut. What cannot be changed? You know the knots and why they must be, or what you would unravel, foolish human. Olowako's thorax squelched, and its stingers curled out and up. It lunged again, but Kazomo had already seen this. Gasping, gagging, he pushed his feet into the god's side and tore his hand free. The last threads of bone and flesh ripped from between the chitinous shells. Blood spurted from the nubs where his fingers had once been, but he moved just in time. The god's stinger impaled itself into his own body. Olowaka's stinger uncoiled from his thorax like a cursed root, sinking deeper into the flesh. Its blood poured out, clear liquid that mingled with the midnight sap of its venom. Its body pulsed, first with the rhythmic timing of the deadly venom, and second with the agony of the reaper's approach. The god screamed, baby mouths gone wide, tongues, white grubworms lolling. Its death throes echoed from all directions. An eardrum burst, and then something wet trickled down Kazomo's cheek. He floated towards McKenna's soul thread, never once asking why he wasn't hurtling to his death. Yelling in time with the god's death throes, Kazomo cut the malignant cord that intertwined itself around his daughter's line. The kukri cut it with ease, and then the weaver died. Not with a wheeze, or a final gasp, or a peaceful repose, but with violence. It exploded, light flaring from its body, a star rejoining the dust. The air was forced from Kazomo's body, and he was thrown away from it all. The world became a blur of heavenly light, constellations and soul light. And then he was in ice, hurtling through water, the light, the vent. Now came the darkness. What came next? Kazomo didn't know, for even the bones hadn't foretold that far. He awoke. His eyes flickered open. Daytime? Dusk? The transitionary light poured in through the arched doorway. Grunting, Kazomo sat up and rubbed his head. He was in the garden sanctuary. What happened? He froze, the sight of his fingerless hands bringing everything back to the fore. The flesh was smooth and shone like a wound that had been cauterized and was already a week into healing. Slapping his body, pinching his skin, he peeled with a girlish laugh. I'm alive! And that... Remembering himself, he fell silent and scrabbled for the shadows of Alawaka's plinth. Pushing behind debris and broken marble, he frowned. He didn't recall Olawaka's bust being broken, but he had little time to think about it, for he had just made it just in time. The sound of laughter and the slap of bare feet announced the approach of two aged women, hairless and ebony-skinned. The women wore white over their bosoms and with matching skirts of pristine presentation. Studs of jade and sapphire adorned their ears, nose, and belly buttons. Mother of the stones, I thought only men could serve as priests. He kept his thoughts to himself. Approaching the sanctuary pool, they tossed rose petals onto its glassy waters and spent several minutes lighting incenses before offering an evening prayer. It was difficult for Kazomo to wait. All he wanted to do was go see his daughter, to hold her, to tell her all would be well. And once the priestesses had left, he waited a little bit more before skulking out of the sanctuary, through the hole in the wall, and back through the pinwheel city of Zayoma. So wrought with a desire to see McKenna, he failed to notice that which had changed, such as the stroke of violet that now adorned each pinwheel, or that the kukri had disappeared, or that he was clothed in garments he'd never owned, or that the city was alive with the cries of hundreds. All that mattered to Kazomo was calling to his daughter as he slammed the door of his house open. "Opal of my heart," he called. "Where are you? I have the most wonderful news!" His daughter's voice sounded from upstairs. Climbing the thin, shadowed staircase, he came to his daughter's room. "McKenna, you are healed!" And as he stepped into his daughter's room, his joy turned to a question. Kazomo's brow knitted into a line of thick worry. McKenna was nowhere to be seen. Her room was in disarray. The vase that always held her favorite flowers was smashed on the floor. Her sheets were asunder and her belongings scattered about. "Abba," McKenna's voice sounded from under the bed. Rushing onto his hands and knees, he pulled his daughter out. Setting her on the edge of the bed, his worry subsided as he found her unharmed. He gasped. She was unblemished, he realized. Not a sign of leprosy on her. It had worked. Only her fear kept him from rejoicing, however. What has happened? Kozomo asked, running a hand over the thin skin of her skull. She whimpered and pointed a shaky hand to her closet. In there, Kozomo whispered. Gripping a jagged shard of pottery, he tiptoed to the door and with an inhale tore it open. Hinges creaked and his arms raised back to pummel the intruder, but his daughter's shriek stopped him cold. Within, before him, stood McKenna, shaking, frightened. Disbelieving his very eyes, he looked back and forth. McKenna stood before him, and she sat behind him. He stepped away, mouth dropping. Abba, the closet McKenna spoke. And as she did, the door to the room creaked open, and in danced another copy of his daughter. She froze. Screams rang out. Then came a voice, a man's voice, his voice. Opal of my heart, I have returned home. The fragment of pottery slipped from Kozomo's hand and shattered on the floor, breaking into shards and dust. What have I done? Kozomo breathed, as horror coiled around him like the slick, silent touch of a water viper. The weaver was dead, the true god unmade, and the world was unthreaded by his hand, and now it spun on without design or mercy. There would be no salvation, only echoes, false and flickering, repeating through ruin of all that had once been real. And far above, in the vault where stars once sang, something vast and listening stirred, with a deep and horrendous laughter. So that's the end of that short story, Threads of the Weaver. As you can tell, I'm not a professional storybook reader, so there's mistakes in there. But I hope that you enjoyed that. I'll write short stories every single month and let my newsletter subscribers read them. This was one of them. I hope to be reading one of my books in the future, but I just want to test out and see how this goes. So if you want to be able to read that or other stories, then you can always head over to my website at isaacyorks.com. But in the meanwhile, hit the bell, get notified, and yeah, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. All right. Peace.